My name is Cheyenne Cabral, and I'm doing my presentation on the ecological interaction between coneflowers and long-tongued bees. So this interaction was filmed at a wine vineyard in Lodi, California. Throughout this botanical garden, you will see several long-tongued bees that are pollinating on a bed of coneflowers. Now, of course, everyone has heard of bees pollinating, but do you really know what is actually happening during this process? When bees are pollinating, they are actually landing on one flower to collect the nectar and pollen from the male reproductive organ of that flower and then transporting it to another flower of the same type. They do this by rolling the pollen onto the female productive organ of this new flower. When a bee lands on the flower, they sip the nectar, while pollen is collected by sticking to their body and hair. In this interaction, the specific flower that the bee is landing on is called coneflowers. So like all the flowers you see in this video, they're called coneflowers. They're one of the biggest attractors for bees, which is due mainly to the color. These flowers bloom for a long period of time, from summer until fall. Aside from the long-tongued bee, another primary pollinator for these coneflowers are butterflies. Nectar provides energy for these bees, while pollen provides the bees with proteins and other nutrients. Nectar is what eventually gets turned into honey. Bees require nectar and pollen to live, and they are able to survive throughout the winter by storing pollen in their beehives. Even though it begins to dry out and lose some of its nutritional value over time, it still allows the bees to survive throughout the winter. Pollination benefits the flowers as well by allowing the male and female reproductive parts of two separate flowers of the same type to stick together, which yields the production of more seeds and fruits. Without pollination, a flower will not be able to bloom properly or grow any fruits. However, bees and butterflies are not the only thing that are able to pollinate. Other living organisms such as beetles, moths, wasps, ants, birds, and many more are also able to pollinate. So for my experiment, I will be testing honey-making progress for this group of long-tongued bees that you see in this video. The way that I will test this is by enclosing a section of flowers with the honeycomb frame for a certain period of time. The honeycomb frames create a space for the bees to build wax comb to store their food and honey. These honeycomb frames flip around so you are able to examine and collect the honey. I will be checking the honeycomb frames every 2 weeks for 1 year. During my study, I will leave the frames open for 3 hours every 2 days for old bees to leave and new ones to come in. This is to prevent old bees from dying or running out of resources. Every 2 weeks, I will be measuring the amount of honey I collect from the honeycomb frames. Throughout the year, I will use the data to create graphs that connect the amount of honey produced over time. The experiment is to help determine the time of year that is more likely to yield the highest production of honey. The independent variables in this experiment will be the size of the area enclosed, the frequency I check the frames, and the length of time I leave the frames open. Dependent variables will include the amount of bees that migrate into the confined space and the amount of honey produced each time I check my honeycomb frames. My hypothesis is that March, April, and May will have the highest honey production due to optimal temperatures and the nectar inside the flowers being most concentrated at these times. If my hypothesis is correct, we can infer that bees produce the most amount of honey in the springtime. If my hypothesis is incorrect, then we can infer that bees might produce the most honey in a different season of the year, or there may be no optimal time to yield the most honey production. Other factors that affect the outcome of my experiment are the location of the flower bed, the amount of shade around the testing area, weather inconsistencies and flower growth each month. Concluding what months have the highest honey production will also provide us with more knowledge on the life cycle of bees and further understanding of why there are more productive in given months. Furthermore, we will be able to understand bee contribution to the honey industry and how those businesses are able to keep selling honey year-round. Something that could be tested through further experimentation could be to repeat this experiment using the same exact variables except with different types of honey plants. The result could determine which plants attract the most bees and the specific plants that are most successful for honey production. Multiple studies of this kind will indicate which flowers produce different honey and how this affects the taste and color of the honey. Shown here is my works cited, and thank you everyone for listening.